To me, the obvious approach to socialism seemed consumer cooperation. I tried to plan an organization among Negroes as consumers, which would furnish employment, help savings, and bring unity of action. Without the power of government, it would fail. And with the power of government, it was socialism. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
There's a wonderful quote by W.E.B. DuBois, who I think you all know, early Black intellectual. I think he was the first Black PhD at Harvard, also the founder of urban sociology, but also a proponent of cooperatives. There's a quote that I don't often use from him that really I think is good for today, to remind us of today. And that is, he said, and actually, I believe he said this in 1907 in Atlanta, when he was having his conference on Negro businesses and economic cooperation in 1907. And he said, in the spirit of revolt, which tried to cooperate by means of insurrection, that led to widespread organization for the rescue of fugitive slaves among Negroes themselves, and then developed into various cooperative efforts toward economic emancipation and land buying. So he says, gradually, these efforts led to cooperative business, building and loan associations, and trade unions. So what does that mean? He's saying that in order to revolt, African peoples had to recognize the need to cooperate in order to achieve their goals. And this was cooperation and actually organizing the revolts. But that cooperation, right, to be free and physical free, right, that led us to see that we could and should also organize for other kinds of freedom, not just freedom from enslavement, but and we used the Underground Railroad, and that was another whole solidarity cooperative system to get us from enslavement to freedom. But also we needed freedom from economic exploitation. And so again, you organizing cooperatively, collective work and responsibility so that we could actually achieve economic emancipation. So for Du Bois, the Black co-op ownership started actually from our efforts to liberate ourselves. And so from resistance to revolt, to organization, to cooperation, to economic emancipation. And so again, this resist and build is so meaningful when we look at, when we can understand our history from that perspective. One of the best and easiest examples of resist and build is to look at the Black Panther Party in the 1960s, late 1960s and early 70s, right? It started out as an organization for self-defense against police brutality. But the Panthers early on realized that they also needed to defend against state violence and economic violence. And so they engaged in community-controlled economic development, not just using mutual aid, but actually collective survival programs that they called survival programs pending revolution. They argued the need for radical restructuring of our society to eliminate racism and exploitation. They knew that systems needed to be changed at the same time that people's and communities' immediate needs needed to be met. So they developed programs that reflected the world they wanted to build. Free breakfast for Black children, while also teaching them about our own history, about African American history, developing their sense of pride and purpose. They also did free health clinics because they believed everyone deserved health care, proper health care. They had sickle cell anemia research projects going on. They also developed co-op businesses that addressed the immediate needs, but also helped to prepare us to engage in systemic change, to learn how to make decisions together, run cooperative businesses, right? So not just to provide co-op bakeries so that we could have food, not just co-op food shoe factories, not just co-op pest control companies to address the pest control issues, not just the co-op newspaper, not just co-op transportation services, right? So one, we're getting at the needs that we had immediately, but we're also learning how to be human beings in our economic systems and how to work together, own together, share what the profits were, and make sure that our businesses were doing the things that our community needed. So while addressing community needs, we were developing the enterprises that were going to be governed collectively, sharing resources, reducing our reliance on the exploitative and racist businesses. And so again, this notion that we could resist and build at the same time and build toward a better future in ways that would help us become better, stronger human beings and create better, stronger human systems to address our human needs.
So you can see there, and there's sort of the crux of my disagreement that I just wanted to express and share briefly here. In each case, whether referencing Du Bois or the Black Panther Party, the socialism and the Marxist Leninism is always left out, and is in this case also left out. The link to the full panel is in the show description. You can watch it, but it doesn't come up. It's certainly not featured, and it's not mentioned or centered in to point out that in each case, cooperatives and the Panthers were very explicit. Fred Hampton himself was very explicit that the point of the free breakfast programs and the sickle cell programs was to, again, similar to what Professor Nembhard is saying, to teach people the value of working collectively, but specifically to teach them what is the function of what the ultimate goal of a socialist economy is meant to demonstrate. So through demonstration to show the value of socialism, not to have people convinced, even when expressed as it was here, that cooperatives are part of survival programs pending revolution, when the political context of those referenced or their ultimate eventual criticism of cooperatives in this case is left out. What is initially correctly described as a survival program pending revolution becomes seen, consciously or not, by an audience for these conversations and Dr. Nembhard's work, of course, the goal itself. In other words, when Du Bois is referenced, when the Panthers are referenced, and their broader politics are not, that is, the Marxist Leninism of the Panthers, the Pan Africanist scientific socialism of Du Bois, his specific condemnation of cooperatives, when all of that is ignored, consciously or not, the audience for these discussions, and I think of Dr. Nembhard's work, is invited to think of cooperatives as an end goal or an end political project or something superior to or better than the broader, more radical conclusions of the Panthers or Du Bois. The invitation to consider socialism, to consider Marxist Leninism, even in its shortcomings, is not made because it's not mentioned, even in the context of a panel like this, where the Panthers or Du Bois are mentioned, their politics and the reasons for them engaging in cooperatives are not fully explored or explained. So again, I'll just quickly share here. I've, in a couple of other videos, gone through the text and even the audio where Du Bois is heard speaking what we're going to see here in just a minute. But in this article here by Curtis Haynes Jr., it's a good summary of where Du Bois was on the idea of cooperativism and socialism, or and black capitalism, and he was a critic of all of it, obviously. But so the long story short is, again, Du Bois's support for cooperatives reached its height during the Great Depression when he visualized the imminent collapse of the capitalist system and continued well into the 1940s. After that, Du Bois spent the last years of his life charmed with a new model of government intervention based on the socialist planning methods of major socialist states. By 1958, he saw socialism as the only means for the emancipation for blacks. American Negroes must study socialism, its rise in Europe, in Asia, and its peculiar suitability for the emancipation of Africa. They must realize that no system of reform offers the American Negro such real emancipation as socialism.
Message!
So as we saw, Dr. Nembhard starts her conversation and ends it with Du Bois in 1907, we see that by not considering what he had to say at the end of his life and after the 30s and 40s and after his attempts to engage cooperatives and variations of black capitalism, then I think it's a disservice even when mentioning cooperatives as survival programs pending revolution. If we don't explicitly remind, especially if as I think Dr. Nembhard does in her work and certainly on this panel, center Du Bois as part of what explains and defends her analysis and argument in favor of cooperatives, then I think she and others need to confront and engage what Du Bois ultimately came to conclude about those efforts. Even if she or anyone else thinks that Du Bois is wrong at the end of his life, I think it needs to be acknowledged, again, especially since she uses him so centrally. There should be some acknowledgement. Well, he did change. This is why I agree or don't agree with the change. This is where I think that his change on this is not relevant, or why I agree or don't agree, something to acknowledge it. But to simply lay out Du Bois as she says at the beginning of the panel, as a defender of cooperatives, and never explain that he eventually changed it, unconsciously, I think, encourages the audience to accept cooperatives as more of an end goal than a stopover. That is a survival program pending revolution. And then and then there is no definition or explanation of what the Panthers or Du Bois thought of as the revolution that was, or for which we were surviving. But more specifically, Du Bois said here in his 1960 lecture, again, I've gone over this and played even the audio of him saying this, but he says it very plainly here. To me, the obvious approach to socialism seemed consumer cooperation. I tried to plan an organization among Negroes as consumers which would furnish employment, help savings, and bring unity of action. Without the power of government, it would fail. And with the power of government, it was socialism.
Message!
His point, Black people do not, the same argument I've been making and trying to build from, in part using his own work, that is Du Bois. Black businesses cannot scale to satisfy the needs of Black consumers because Black consumers do not have the income and the wealth to develop and scale those businesses. As Du Bois said, as his political disciple Dr. King would say, massive government involvement is necessary. Du Bois just more appropriately called it socialism. We don't have to agree, but we have to acknowledge that that's what the argument was, and then engage it and demonstrate its weaknesses. But to continue to just simply say that Du Bois supported cooperatives is factually incorrect, and it leaves out his evolving historical analysis. And I think what we would be better considering or being explicit about, even as we want to build survival programs pending revolution.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.